She came west to marry a man of God, but ended up saving a man everyone else gave up on, a dying outlaw, a preacher with a secret, and a woman running from her past who learned that redemption never arrives the way we think. Before we dive in, leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and hit the subscribe button. Eliza sat stiffly in the stagecoach seat, her gloved fingers clenched tight around the worn envelope that had changed the course of her life. Dust curled through the seams of the canvas windows, catching the slanting rays of evening sun as the coach rattled westward, every jolt in the trail jarring her bones and her thoughts. The letter was from a preacher named Josiah Benton, a man of God, with kind words and clean handwriting, who had promised her a fresh beginning and a quiet life on the frontier. His ink was soft, his promises softer, and Eliza had read the lines so many times the creases threatened to tear. She tucked the letter back into her coat pocket and reached for the locket that hung on a fine silver chain beneath her dress, brushing her fingers over its cool surface. Inside was a fading photograph of her sister, the one she couldn't save, the one no one knew about. Eliza's jaw tightened. This journey wasn't about love. It wasn't about second chances. It was about atonement. A whistle split the wind as the driver shouted down from the bench. His voice clipped with alarm, and then the coach lurched violently to one side. Eliza's shoulder slammed against the wooden wall, and the other passengera's snoring rancher let out a grunt of surprise. The horses screamed, hooves scattering gravel, and with a thunderous snap the axle cracked and the front wheel gave way, sending the stage teetering toward the slope. The world tilted, and for one breathless second Eliza thought this was either punishment catching up at last, but the coach skidded to a stop in a plume of dust just short of the ravine. The door flew open and the driver leapt down, swearing as he kicked the broken wheel. Eliza climbed out after him, coughing, boots crunching on the brittle weeds that lined the path. "We can't go no farther," the driver said, tugging at his hat. "Wheels shot clean through. Nearest stop's 5 miles, and night's coming fast." Eliza turned to survey the landscape-rugged hills rolled out like the spine of some ancient beast, all crags and shadows and creaking trees. The rancher started off down the road on foot, cursing and muttering. The driver followed to fetch help, promising to return by morning. Eliza stayed. She didn't ask why. Something in her bones told her this was where she was meant to pause. She stood alone in the dry hush of twilight, and that's when she saw him, just a blur of color in the trees at first. A dark shape crumpled in the dust 20 yards off the road. Her skirts caught on the brush as she rushed forward, breath tightening with each step. The man lay face down, blood pooled beneath him, his coat torn, one arm twisted unnaturally. A revolver glinted by his side. Eliza dropped to her knees beside him and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Faint, but still alive. "Sir," she whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. He groaned, eyes fluttering open, then shut again as a ragged breath tore through his chest. She saw the wound, a fresh one, near the ribsand, ripped a strip of fabric from her petticoat without a second thought. She pressed it against the bleeding and looked around. No signs of life, no horses, no trail of tracks. Whoever shot him hadn't stayed to finish it. Eliza wrapped the cloth tight and sat back on her heels, mind racing. She could leave, walk to town, find the preacher, start over, but her feet didn't move. Instead, she dragged the stranger by the shoulders, inch by inch, toward the trees where she'd glimpsed an old cabin through the brush. It took everything in her. By the time they reached the porch, sweat soaked her collar and her arms trembled from strain. She kicked open the crooked door and found the place bare only a stone hearth, a broken chair, and the scent of long-dead fires. She laid him on a threadbare rug and gathered sticks for the fire, striking flint with trembling fingers until the spark caught. His face looked different in the firelight, gaunt but not cruel, rugged but not hardened. A scar crossed his jaw. His shirt was soaked in blood and dirt, but as she peeled it back to clean the wound, something else caught her eye, a gleam of metal tucked under the vest. A badge. Her breath caught. Not outlaw, lawman, or maybe both. She pried it loose and turned it in the firelight. U.S. Marshal. But the engraving had been scratched through, as if someone had tried to erase the name beneath. Her hand tightened around it, She should have been afraid. She should have run. But Eliza only sat there, staring at the unconscious man and the badge that no longer claimed him. Whatever he was, whatever sin clung to him, he wasn't the only one running from something. She knew the look, because she wore it too. By dawn, the outlaw burned like kindling. His breath came shallow, skin slick with sweat, lips cracked and whispering names Eliza didn't recognize. She'd spent the night feeding the fire and boiling creek water in an old tin pot she found under the hearth, her hands shaking as she pressed wet cloths to his head. The fever came in waves, dragging him between muttered curses and raw pleas, and more than once she caught him reaching for the badge she'd tucked beneath a floorboard. "Don't!" he gasped once, his voice hoarse. "They'll come if they see it." Eliza froze, the cloth halfway to his brow. "Who?" she asked quietly, but his eyes rolled back and the answer dissolved, with the sweat dripping down his temples. Outside, the forest held its breath. It was too quiet, like even the wind was wary of something unseen. She caught herself glancing at the trees more than once, half expecting to see a rider or a rifle glinting between the branches. Nothing came. Just stillness, and the weight of a man's secrets choking the air in that broken cabin. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every crack in the wood, every creak of snow shifting on the roof made her heart hammer like it did back in Missouri, the night she'd fled her father's house with the pistol tucked in her skirts and her sister's locket clutched in her fist. That pistol was gone now, pawned for stage fare and warm boots. But the locket remained, cold against her chest, reminding her why she couldn't turn back. She was supposed to be in Sweetwater today, meeting the preacher, starting clean. Instead, she was watching a stranger die, holding rags to a bullet hole, and wondering what kind of man hid a U.S. Marshal badge like it was a curse. By midday, his fever broke. The flush faded from his cheeks and his lashes twitched, then parted slowly, revealing gray eyes that didn't quite trust what they saw. "You ain't him," he said, voice barely audible. "No," she replied softly. "And you ain't dead." He tried to sit up but groaned, collapsing back with a sharp intake of breath. "Where?" "Cabin, near Deadman's Hollow. You were bleeding bad. I stopped the stage and found you." He nodded faintly, eyes drifting toward the fire. "Name's Cole," he said after a pause. "Cole Fletcher." She said nothing. The name didn't mean anything to her, but the way he said it made her wonder if it would have meant something to someone else. "You law?" she asked. He looked at her, slow and measured. "Not anymore. That badge of yours says otherwise." His jaw tensed. "Ain't mine. Not since Abilene." Eliza didn't press. She knew the feel of doors best left closed. Instead, she brought him water and helped him sip. His hand brushed hers, and for a moment, just one heartbeat-long moment, something passed between them, recognition maybe, or the ache of two souls both too bruised to flinch. The fire crackled. Outside, snow began to fall. Thick, slow flakes that clung to the branches and smothered the wind. They were trapped now. She knew it. No tracks in or out. No stage returning until the thaw. Just her and a wounded man with a past he wouldn't speak of. That night, Eliza sat by the fire while Cole slept, his breath steadier now, his skin cool. She pulled her knees to her chest and stared at the badge beneath the floorboard, the metal catching flickers of flame through the cracks. What kind of man scratches his own name off a badge? And what kind of woman stays in a cabin with him? She touched the locket again, her thumb brushing over the tarnished surface. Her sister's face stared up at her, faded and soft, the way she'd looked the night they tried to run. They didn't make it far. Only Eliza made it at all. She thought of the preacher, his letters full of scripture and promises, and wondered what he'd think if he saw her now skirt stained with blood, hair tangled, fingers raw from gathering wood and stitching flesh. Not quite the bride he ordered. Then again, maybe he wasn't the man he pretended to be either. Men who needed mail-order brides often carried shadows too. She laid down on the rug across from Cole, watching the firelight dance along his cheek. In the quiet, he stirred and muttered something low. "What did you say?" she whispered. "They know," he rasped. "Know what? About the hollow. About what I buried." Eliza's pulse quickened. What did you bury? But he didn't answer. Just turned away and let sleep drag him down again. She stared at his back, trying to piece together the puzzle of his pain. Something lay in this place. Something more than a man with a bullet wound and a haunted past. And part of her, the part that had always listened when her gut whispered, knew she wasn't meant to find a preacher. She was meant to find this. Him. Eliza woke to the sound of distant howling, low and lonesome, carrying through the timbers like the wail of something ancient. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the cabin in a flickering rust-orange hush. She stirred slowly, her back stiff from the cold floor, her limbs aching from stillness and strain. Cole was asleep still, his breath steady now, one hand curled near his chest, like he was shielding something even in his dreams. She watched him a moment longer, the rise and fall of his chest, the way his jaw twitched like he was fighting memories even in rest. And then she rose quietly, adding more wood to the flames before slipping outside into the brittle morning. Snow had fallen heavy in the night, cloaking the world in silence, the kind that made even thoughts feel loud. The forest was a cathedral of white, limbs bowed low beneath the weight, sky the color of old parchment. Eliza wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped into the drift, the snow crunching beneath her boots as she moved toward the woodshed, but then stopped. Tracks. They weren't hers. Weren't from any creature she knew. Not quite wolf, not quite man. Large, deep, meandering from the tree line to the cabin, then vanishing back into the brush like a ghost that had come and gone in silence. Her blood ran cold. She bent to examine them, heart thudding, every inch of her skin prickling like it knew something her mind refused to say. Clawed, but upright. She had grown up with story tales whispered by her mother, when the wind cried at the windows and the lanterns flickered without reason. Tales of spirits who wandered the woods, who wore skins that weren't theirs, who watched from the dark places between trees. Eliza had scoffed then, brushed them off as old country fears. But this looked like something that didn't belong in any story that ended well. She followed the prints a few steps until the woods swallowed them, then turned back quickly, fear settling under her skin like a chill that wouldn't lift. Inside, Cole was stirring, eyes slitted, voice gravel-scraped. You saw it, didn't you? She froze. Saw what? The tracks. She swallowed hard. What was it? He didn't answer, just stared at the ceiling, the lines in his face deeper than they were the day before. They come when the hollow stirs, when something wakes that should have stayed buried. You're not making sense. Ain't supposed to, just supposed to run. But I didn't. He coughed, wincing. Did something worse. Eliza sat beside him, studying him like the answer might be etched into his scars. What did you do, Cole? Swore an oath, he said slowly, like every word had weight. To protect what didn't want protecting, to silence what had already screamed. His eyes flicked to her. There's bones out there, Eliza. Bones under snow that don't rest easy. Men with smiles too wide. A preacher with blood on his hands and words like honeyed poison. That badge? He trailed off, voice fraying at the edges. You know, I didn't plan to find anyone in this place, she murmured. Least of all you. I didn't plan on living long enough for anyone to find me, he said. A silence stretched between them, thick and uneasy, broken only by the wind brushing the cabin walls. Then faintly the baby cried. Eliza turned, startled. Cole's eyes narrowed. You have a child? She stood quickly. No, there's no baby. But there it was again, a soft, plaintive wail, coming from the back room she hadn't dared open since arriving. The room with a door that stuck. She moved toward it slowly, hand trembling, heart pounding with a dread she couldn't name. The cry grew louder. She gripped the handle, bracing, and pushed it open. Nothing. Just dust, broken floorboards, and a cradle empty, long forgotten, half collapsed. The cry vanished like mist in sunlight. Behind her, Cole's voice rasped. You heard it, didn't you? There's nothing there, she said, backing away. Not anymore. There never was, he said. That's the problem. She turned to face him. What's happening to this place? Not to the place. To us. The hollow don't let secrets stay buried. It calls them up, makes them speak. She stared at him, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath her boots. Then we need to leave. Can't. Why not? Because if we run, it'll follow. Always does. You came here for redemption, didn't you? Well, now you've got company. She looked down at her hands, the ones that once held a locket and a pistol and a choice she couldn't undo. I came here to forget. Then you picked the wrong hollow. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, and the tracks at the edge of the woods began to fill with snow. As if something didn't want them followed again. The man on the horse came just before sundown, riding slow like he didn't want to disturb the dead. And Eliza knew before he even spoke that this was the one she'd meant to marry, the one she'd traveled west for with trembling hands and a past stitched shut with prayer, the man who called himself Preacher Samuel Grange. He wore black from collar to boot, with a silver cross that caught the dying light and eyes that didn't blink often enough, as if even the act of looking too long had to be rationed. He stepped down from the saddle and tipped his hat with a courtesy so precise it felt rehearsed, his voice calm as a river stone. Miss Eliza? She didn't speak right away. She was still holding a kettle in her hands, not quite believing that a man like this had appeared on a trail this forgotten, without a letter, without warning. He looked around the clearing with a narrow glance, noting the smoke from the chimney, the bloodstains on the snow that hadn't melted right, and the half-healed man slumped inside. I see you found company. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Not by choice, she said, setting the kettle down hard. He was dying. Still might be. And you're nursing him? I didn't come here to let someone bleed out in the snow. You came to be my wife, he said simply, walking past her toward the porch. To help build something holy in a place like this. Eliza followed him with a cold twist in her gut. You didn't come for me. I did, he said, pausing. Though I expected to find you waiting alone. He stepped into the cabin like he owned it, eyes landing on Cole with something between recognition and contempt. And you? How long do you plan on intruding on what's not yours? Cole didn't flinch. He just lifted his gaze, slow and deliberate, and Eliza could swear the room dropped a few degrees. Funny, Cole said hoarsely. That's the same thing I was going to ask you. The silence that followed had weight. Preacher Grange leaned his shoulder against the doorframe and looked down at Cole like he was something sour left too long in the sun. You know what this man is, Eliza. He was wearing a badge, she said. And bleeding out. That's what I know. That badge don't shine anymore, Grange said. He was stripped of it for good reason. If justice had been quicker, you'd have found a corpse, not a patient. Justice, Cole muttered. A word men like you bend like river reeds. Grange stepped forward. You speak bold for someone who can barely stand. You speak clean for a man with blood in his teeth, Cole replied. Eliza moved between them, her hands clenched. Enough. I don't know either of you well enough to sort your history, and I didn't ride west to be pulled into someone else's war. Grange's expression softened, but only slightly. You came here for a new life, Eliza, a path free from the sins that drove you away. You wrote me letters full of regret and hope. You begged God for another chance. Her breath caught. How do you know what I wrote? He held up a folded piece of paper, her handwriting, her seal. Because I'm the one who was meant to deliver you to that second chance. And I still will. Behind her, Cole coughed, a dry sound that dragged on like gravel scraping wood. He's not what he says, Cole rasped. Don't trust what's dressed too clean in a place that's never been pure. And you are? Grange said. A man who lost his badge, his town, and his mind. What good are you to her? Cole's eyes met Eliza's. I didn't come to save her. She ain't the one who needs saving. The words hit something deep, something she hadn't dared admit aloud. Grange turned to her again. Eliza, come with me. I have a wagon in town, supplies, a place for you. You don't belong in this cabin with ghosts and shadows. She hesitated. She remembered the way Cole had flinched from the fever, the way he whispered in his sleep, the hand that gripped hers like it was the only thing holding him to this world. And she remembered the sound of the cradle, the cry that never was. I need time, she said. This isn't what I imagined. Grange's face hardened, just a flicker, then gone. 2 days. I'll return. Choose wisely. With that he tipped his hat again and turned, boots crunching over snow as he mounted and rode off, his silhouette swallowed by the dusk. Eliza stood there a long time after, the wind tugging at her shawl, her thoughts a snarl of promises made and truths unspoken. Inside, Cole whispered her name, not loud, not desperate, just there. And when she stepped back in, she didn't speak. She just sat beside him, took his hand again, and for the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel like she was hiding. She felt like someone else was, and she was finally ready to look it in the eye. The night after Preacher Grange rode away, the world fell so quiet that Eliza could hear every shift of the wind through the brittle trees, every crackle of the fire as if it too were holding its breath. And somewhere behind it all, the whisper of something waiting, something watching. Cole slept fitfully, his face half buried in the pillow she'd stitched from her old church dress, his skin still pale but the fever retreating like a wounded dog too proud to whimper. She sat beside him with a damp cloth, and her own thoughts unraveling, each thread pulling at another. The way Grange had spoken her name like a sermon, the way Cole had bled and burned but never begged, the way her hand still trembled when no one was looking. She'd come west to be forgiven, but now she wasn't sure if forgiveness meant escape or confrontation, and when she closed her eyes, all she could see were two Mennoni in black, with a silver cross, and no dust on his boots. The other in rags with pain stitched into his spine and a fire that hadn't gone out even when his body tried to. Sometime past midnight, Cole stirred with a groan that turned into a name, but not hers, and Eliza leaned in close enough to hear it again. "Miles," he whispered, eyes still shut. "Don't shoot, Miles." Her breath caught. "Cole," she said softly, "you're dreaming." But his eyes snapped open, and for one heart-stopping second he didn't see her. He saw smoke and blood and whatever ghosts the name Miles summoned. "It's just me," she said, putting her hand on his shoulder. "You're safe." He blinked once, twice, then his whole body sagged, like something heavy had been lifted off of it. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Sometimes it don't let go easy." "Who's Miles?" she asked gently, though part of her already knew. He looked at her like he was deciding whether she could carry the weight of the truth. "My brother. He wore the badge, too. Braver than me. Died because I hesitated." Eliza's breath caught. "You watched him die?" "No," he said. "I gave the order that got him killed." The fire cracked between them. "Grange said you were stripped of your badge, that you lost it for good reason." Cole's jaw worked like he wanted to spit something out but knew it'd taste too bitter. Grange wasn't always a preacher. He wore the badge once too, but he didn't like how I ran things. Thought I was too soft. He wanted justice like a thunderclap. I wanted it to look people in the eye. So he turned on you," she said. "Worse," Cole whispered. "He waited till the right moment. The day after Miles died, he accused me of corruption. Said I let criminals go for money. Town turned on me so fast I thought I'd been dreaming. Took the badge. Took my name. Left me for dead in a ravine when I tried to speak my side." Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. "And now he wears a cross. He wears what lets him walk into a room clean," Cole said, eyes hard. "But the blood's still there, just hidden." They sat in silence for a long time after that, and when she finally rose to fetch more firewood, she noticed something strange. The door wasn't fully latched. She was certain she'd closed it tight. Her eyes scanned the cabin slowly, and then the woods just beyond the window, where something, a shadow or a man or a memory, moved too smoothly to be wind. "Stay inside," she told Cole, grabbing the old hunting rifle by the door and stepping out into the moonlight. The snow had frozen over, crunching sharp underfoot, and the stars overhead blinked cold and distant. She moved past the porch, rifle raised, every breath visible in the air like smoke signals. "Who's there?" she called. No answer, just the faintest sound of crickets, out of season and out of place. And then snap, a branch broken. She turned, heart racing, but saw only the edge of the woods and the shimmer of something metallic, something like a belt buckle or a barrel. "I'm armed," she shouted, louder now. "You've got 5 seconds." Still silence. Still that mocking song of winter crickets. She fired once into the trees, not aiming to hit, just to warn. The echo bounced off the canyon walls and came back to her like a curse. Then footsteps, fast, retreating. Whoever had been there wasn't waiting to chat. She stood a long while after they'd gone, just listening, the rifle heavy in her arms and her pulse, a drumbeat in her ears. When she finally went back inside, Cole was sitting up with a knife in his hand and sweat slicking his brow. "Trouble?" he asked. "Not yet," she said, closing the door tight. "But it's coming." And as she bolted the lock, she realized something terrifying and electric all at once when trouble came. She didn't want to be saved by Grange. She wanted to stand beside the man who bled and still didn't break. The next morning broke like a bruised doll, gray and aching. A light snow had dusted the world in silence, but nothing about the way Eliza moved felt calm. She poured hot water over dried beans with shaking hands, trying to pretend she hadn't spent half the night by the door, rifle across her knees, eyes burning holes in the horizon. Cole had dozed off after she assured him the visitor had left, but even in sleep, his fingers twitched toward the knife under his pillow. Something had shifted between them, something unspoken but sharp as a blade's edge. He had trusted her with a name, a history, a ghost, and she'd drawn a line in the frost between what she thought she believed and what she now knew. Men like Cole weren't broken. They were made jagged by betrayal, and she knew that wound because she wore the same kind on her soul. She was halfway through stoking the fire when she heard the sound of hooves. Not a gallop, something slower, deliberate, meant to be heard. Her stomach dropped. Cole's eyes opened instantly. "Stay down," she hissed, grabbing the rifle. He didn't argue. She stepped to the window, heart hammering, and saw a single rider coming up the trail, a man in black, cross glinting on his chest, white gloves too clean for real riding. Grange. She didn't wait for a knock. She opened the door with the rifle resting bold against her shoulder. "You're not welcome here." He smiled, that hollow thing she'd mistaken for warmth once. "Sister Eliza, no need for dramatics. I came only to check on your well-being." "You came to finish what you started," she said, not blinking. "Or see if Cole was dead yet." His smile didn't fade, but his eyes narrowed. "He's poisoned you. That man is a liar, a traitor, and worse, he's good at making sin sound like salvation." "And you?" she said. "What do you make sound like salvation?" Grange's voice dropped. "Truth. Consequence. The law." "You mean the law that leaves men bleeding in canyons?" she snapped. "You want to play preacher now, but you left justice to rot in your holster." "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, suddenly less composed. "You weren't there. You didn't see what he let happen." "I've seen what you let happen," she said, "and I'm not going to let it happen again." He stepped closer, boots crunching the snow. "He's not who you think he is, Eliza. Whatever you're clinging to, it'll turn on you, just like it did me." "Then you should have held on tighter," she said, and closed the door in his face. For a long minute, she didn't move. Neither did he. Then, slowly, his footsteps retreated, and only when the sound of hooves faded into wind did she exhale. She turned and found Cole watching her with a look she couldn't quite name. "He's not going to stop," Cole said. "He doesn't know how." "Then we won't either," she said, her voice quieter now. She brought him food, helped him sit up, and for the first time since she'd met him, she noticed the tremble in his fingers as he took the cup from her hands. Not from weakness, but from remembering. "You meant what you said about Miles?" she asked. He nodded. "There's more to it, but yeah, I see him sometimes. When the fever's bad, when the guilt gets louder than the wind." "And Grange?" "He never forgave me for being chosen over him," Cole said. "And when I failed, he saw a clean excuse to take what he thought was his, the badge, the town, even the God he prays to. He thinks it's his alone to wield." "God doesn't live in crosses," she said. "He lives in what we do with our hands." "Then you've saved me twice," Cole whispered. "Once from the grave, and once from believing I belonged in it." Eliza felt the words land between them like a vow, but before she could answer, a sound shattered the fragile peace. A scream. Not far. "Female." Eliza bolted up, grabbed the rifle again, and raced to the porch. Cole tried to follow but winced hard, hand to his ribs. "Stay," she told him. I'll go. The scream came again, from the creek bend just beyond the trees. Eliza didn't hesitate. She ran. The snow bit into her boots, the wind clawed at her face, but she moved like something was chasing her. Maybe it was just the fear that this place had claimed one more soul. She reached the clearing and found a young woman collapsed in the snow, blood on her hands, dress torn at the sleeve. Behind her, a horse bucked and neighed beside a broken wagon wheel. "Help me!" the woman gasped, pointing back down the road. "He's still there, my boy. He's still trapped." Eliza's heart pounded. "Where?" "Half a mile back," she said. "We were headed to Town Wagon. Broke the wolves came." Eliza knelt, grabbed the girl's shaking hand, and looked toward the trees. "You're safe now," she said, though she wasn't sure if it was true. "Stay here. I'll get him." And without waiting, she took off again, snow flying beneath her boots, gun in hand and fire in her blood, because somewhere out there was a child and wolves and maybe something worse. And if she'd learned anything in the last week, it was that sometimes salvation came not in prayers, but in fury and grit and the sound of boots running straight toward danger. The trees closed around her like judgment, branches skeletal and reaching as Eliza ran, her rifle gripped in hands that shook but didn't falter. Snow clung to her skirts, to her lashes, to the edges of her breath like frostbitten truth, but she didn't slow. The scream had carved itself into her bones, the kind of cry that made mothers wake from sleep and strangers run toward danger. "Half a mile," the girl had said. Half a mile through woods that hadn't seen sunlight since October, where shadows moved wrong and even the wind seemed to whisper threats. Eliza's boots slid on a patch of ice, and she caught herself on a branch slick with cold sap, heart hammering like it was trying to break free. She smelled smoke and blood and the scent of wet fur. Then she saw it. The wrecked wagon lay split like a rib cage against a slope, one wheel still spinning slowly, too slowly, as if time itself was too afraid to touch this place. In the snow, a small figure huddled beneath the broken axle, motionless, the blue wool of a boy's coat streaked with crimson. Eliza didn't think. She moved. Down the slope, knees hitting snow, she skidded toward him, grabbed his shoulders, whispered his name without knowing it. His eyes blinked open, wide with terror, lips too numb to form sound. "It's all right," she said, breathless, brushing snow from his face. "I've got you now." Then the growl came. Low, deep, close. She turned. 3 of them wolves, real and not, their eyes lit with a wild hunger that had nothing to do with meat. One stepped forward, lips curling, snow puffing from its nostrils, like smoke from hell's furnace. Eliza raised the rifle. Her heart wanted to scream. Her mind wanted to flee. But something else rose higher, the part of her that remembered a child in pain, a man with a wound, a world that had already taken too much from the innocent. She fired. The sound cracked through the trees like a commandment. The wolf dropped, thrashing, painting the snow in wide red strokes. The other 2 hesitated, but only for a breath. Then they charged. Eliza grabbed the boy, rolled with him beneath the wagon. Teeth scraped wood inches from her boot. Claws tore at the edge of her coat. She fired, again missed. The gun clicked empty. One of the wolves leapt on top of the wagon, circling like a ghost. She reached for a rock, a stick, anything. But the boy suddenly reached into his pocket, pulled out something Shininga blade, small and shaking in his grip. "Hide behind me," he whispered. Eliza blinked at him. "You're bleeding." "Don't care," he said. "You saved me. I can save you." A howl rose behind them then, the thunder of hooves. A shot, then another. The wolf atop the wagon howled in pain and fell. Eliza peeked out and saw him, Cole, pale and furious, slumped over the saddle of her horse, firing one-handed with the calm fury of a man who'd already died once and decided not to stay that way. The last wolf turned to flee, but Cole's bullet found its spine and dropped it cold. The forest fell silent. Eliza crawled out, dragging the boy with her, snow now red and gray and trembling. She met Cole's eyes as he dismounted, barely staying upright, sweat freezing to his jaw. Told you to stay, she muttered. You didn't listen, he shot back, collapsing to his knees beside her. She laughed then, high and wild, because if she didn't, she might cry. What in God's name are you? She asked. Stupid, he groaned, and apparently incapable of letting you die alone. She looked at the boy. What's your name? Micah, he said. My ma's back down the trail. She said you'd come. Eliza blinked. She said that. He nodded solemnly. Said an angel in brown boots would come running. I thought she was crazy. Cole smirked. She's not the only one. Can you ride? Eliza asked him. I think so, he said, and they helped him onto her horse. Cole took the reins, swaying with every breath. Let's go home, he said, and Eliza didn't correct him, didn't ask what home meant or where it began, because maybe it was right here, three wounded souls, trudging through blood-streaked snow toward a cabin with more questions than answers. When they returned, the mother was still by the fire, arms outstretched, sobbing when she saw her boy. Eliza helped them inside. Cole collapsed into the chair by the stove, face pale, breathing rough. She sat beside him, brushing hair from his forehead. You're bleeding again, she said softly. So are you, he replied. They both laughed, quiet and broken. Why did you come? She whispered. Because I remembered, he said. What it felt like to have someone believe I was worth saving. You made me believe it again. I couldn't let that go. She looked at him a long time, the snow still falling outside, soft and relentless. She didn't touch him. She didn't need to. The space between them was already filled with something warmer than fire. Then don't let go, she said. Not yet. And neither of them did. Night pressed close against the windows like a held breath, and the fire had long since burned low, casting more shadows than light. Eliza sat on the floor with her knees pulled close, her back against the wall, watching the flicker of orange catch in the lines of Cole's face as he slept. Though even in sleep, he didn't rest. His brow twitched, lips moving faintly like he was arguing with ghosts, and when she rose to place a blanket over his shoulder, his hand shot up and clamped around her wrist. Don't, he rasped, eyes snapping open with the wildness of a hunted thing. She didn't pull away. It's me. For a second, that meant nothing. Then his grip loosened, and his fingers brushed away as if ashamed. I'm sorry, he said, voice hoarse. Sometimes I forget where I am, and who you are, she asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He sat up slowly, legs swinging to the floor, hands clasped between his knees like he needed the earth to keep him still. You ever tell someone half a lie, then forget which part was real? Eliza exhaled through her nose, lowering herself beside him. Try a whole life of that. They sat in silence for a while, broken only by the distant cry of an owl and the softer, steadier rhythm of Micah's breathing in the next room. Then Cole spoke again. My name's not Cole, not really. She turned her head. No? It was my mother's name, before she married. Cole was the only thing about her that was clean. I took it when I left the badge behind. Eliza blinked. You were law? He nodded. Deputy U.S. Marshal. Worked the territories with a man named Rutledge. We were good until we weren't. The fire crackled, and Eliza didn't interrupt. Rutledge started taking bribes. Small ones at first overlook a saloon's backroom, ignore a gambler's side game. I told myself it was nothing, but it grew. One day, we got word of a family ambushed on the road, a woman and her son. Witnesses saw a gang fly in preacher flags out of Deadman's Hollow. Rutledge said, let it lie. Eliza's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the hem of her skirt. But you didn't. I couldn't. Rode out alone, found the cabin they were using, saw what they'd done. They were dressed as preachers to get close to travelers, then robbed them, sometimes worse. I shot 3, dragged the last one back to stand trial. Thought that'd be the end. He paused, jaw tight. Instead, I got a bullet in the back from Rutledge himself. He'd been working with them. He made it look like I died in the crossfire. Eliza reached toward the back of his shoulder, where the worst of the scar curved beneath his shirt. And though he flinched, he didn't stop her. You woke up alone, she said, buried under nothing but snow. And hate, he added quietly. I've been trying to decide ever since whether it's justice I want or revenge." Eliza swallowed hard. "And what's the difference?" Cole turned to her. And in the firelight his eyes looked tired enough to carry 100 miles of regret. "Justice is about balance. Revenge is about pain." "Then maybe neither of us needs what we came for," she said, her voice trembling more than she liked. He tilted his head. "What did you come for?" Eliza looked away, jaw tightening. "To marry a preacher. To pretend I was someone else. Someone good." "You are good," he said, almost sharply. "You saved Micah. You stood between a child and death, with nothing but a rifle and a prayer. You stayed with me when you should have run." "I stole bread from a church once," she blurted. "Told a man I loved him just to take his coat. I lied to my father on his deathbed. You think kindness cancels all that out?" "I think kindness is the only thing that does," he said. "And I think you've got more of it in one hand than most men have in their whole damn hearts." She felt her throat close around something raw and unfamiliar. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I might believe you." The silence between them turned soft, like cotton soaked in warmth, and for the first time in days, the fear didn't scream quite so loud. "So what now?" she asked. Cole leaned back, head against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment before answering. "Now we heal, and then we decide if we're gonna run towards something or away." Eliza thought about the preacher waiting in town, about the letter still folded in her bag, unsent, addressed to a name she no longer recognized. She thought about Micah, and the way the boy clung to her skirt like he already knew something she didn't. And then she thought about the man beside her, battered, broken, not who he claimed to be, but also not a lie. "Let's sleep," she whispered. "One day we'll need strength for something bigger than survival." He didn't open his eyes, but he nodded. And in that small gesture was more promise than all the vows she'd ever rehearsed. And as the fire crackled low and the wind whispered again at the window, Eliza felt for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Morning broke in a hush of pale light, and the world outside looked washed clean, like the night had carried away more than just darkness. Eliza stood at the cabin door with her hands wrapped around a steaming tin cup, watching mist snake along the low hills and disappear like a promise left too long. Micah was still sleeping, curled up like a seed in the bedroll by the hearth, and behind her, Cole sat at the table rubbing the stiffness from his shoulder with one hand and clutching a folded letter in the other. She didn't need to see it to know what it said. It was the same letter he'd written and rewritten a dozen times, the one he never sent. "You think he'll answer?" she asked, not turning. "If he's smart, he won't," Cole said. "Men like Rutledge don't ask questions when they're winning. Only when they think the game's about to change." Eliza turned then, walking slowly back toward the table, the boards creaking beneath her bare feet. "You planning on sending it?" Cole looked up, his eyes hollow but steady. "Not yet. Not till I know I can stand on 2 feet long enough to finish what it starts." "And what would that be?" she asked. He didn't answer, but his jaw tensed the way it always did when he wanted to say something noble and instead said nothing at all. She eased herself into the chair across from him, watching the way the firelight painted the side of his face like a portrait. "You told me last night you wanted justice, maybe revenge. But did you ever stop to think there might be another way?" "What way is that?" "Living," she said, and it came out sharper than she intended, like the word had teeth. "Not surviving, not hiding, just living. That scares men like Rutledge more than a bullet ever could." Cole let the letter fall to the table and stared at her like she'd said something holy. "And you think we could do that? Just live?" Eliza nodded, but it felt like she was nodding through water. "I think we might have to." The door creaked behind them, and they both turned to see Micah standing barefoot, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "I'm hungry," he said plainly. And just like that, the conversation vanished like mist. Eliza smiled and rose to pull down a strip of jerky and a tin of beans, and while she worked, she heard Cole's voice behind her, softer than before. "You saved him, you know." "No," she said. "He saved me." The meal was quiet, just the clink of spoons and the occasional hum of wind through the cracks in the walls. But the silence wasn't hollow anymore. It felt full, like soil rich with something waiting to grow. After breakfast, Cole insisted on trying to walk outside. Eliza protested, but his look stopped her cold. He needed this, not for his body, but for whatever war still clawed at his spirit. She helped him to his feet, and together they stepped out into the morning sun. The wind carried the scent of distant rain and pine and something older, like the memory of fire. They walked slowly, with Eliza bracing his good side and Cole leaning heavier than he wanted to admit. When they reached the edge of the clearing, he paused, breath ragged, and looked out over the hills. "That ridge," he said, nodding northward. "That's where the gang set up their traps. I rode through there once and came out a different man." Eliza looked up at him. "And who are you now?" Cole was quiet a long time. "I'm still finding out." A hawk circled above them, casting a flicker of shadow across the grass. Then Cole reached into his coat. How he'd managed to sneak it back on without her seeing, she'd never know, and pulled something out. A badge. Scratched, bent, dulled by time and blood, but still unmistakable. He held it in his palm like it burned. "I thought I might bury it here," he said. "Put it down before I pick up anything else." Eliza reached out and closed his fingers around the metal. "Don't bury it." "Not yet. That badge might still mean something. Not to the men who gave it to you, but to the people who still believe someone should wear it." He looked at her, something unreadable in his gaze, and nodded. "Maybe you're right." They stood there a while longer, two shadows cast in the grass, bound together not by destiny or vow, but something quieter and harder to name. Then they turned and walked back toward the cabin, where smoke rose in a thin curl above the chimney, and Micah waited with wide eyes and a slingshot he didn't know how to use. The day stretched ahead of them, uncertain and beautiful, and as they crossed the clearing, Eliza felt the first threads of something new weave around her ribs. Not safety, not yet, but the beginnings of a home. The sky turned the color of spilled blood that evening, thick with smoke curling from the eastern ridge, and Eliza felt it before she saw it, like the land itself was holding its breath. Cole stood at the cabin door with his weight on one leg, his eyes fixed on the horizon, and the old badge she thought he'd tucked away now clipped to his belt like a scar he refused to cover. "They're coming," he said, low and sure. "Not bandits, not drifters, men with torches and orders." Eliza didn't ask who sent them. She already knew. Rutledge's silence had never been safety, it was planning. She moved to gather Micah, who had fallen asleep beside the fire with a pine cone tucked in his arms like a toy, and she cradled him close, pressing a kiss to his hair. "We can't stay," she whispered, but Cole didn't flinch. "We can't run either. We're not soldiers," she snapped, voice cracking. "We're barely whole." He turned to her then, and in his eyes was something steadier than defiance, resolve, carved from every wound he'd never let bleed. "I didn't crawl back from death to run from the men who think they own this land. And you didn't come all this way just to be chased into the dust." Eliza felt something ancient rise in her chest, not anger, not pride, but a wild, trembling clarity. She nodded once and moved to the hearth, tossing aside the empty coffee tins to reach the false floor beneath. Hidden there was the pistol she hadn't touched since Kansas, since before the letters to the preacher, before the prayers that never left her lips. She loaded it slow, her hands shaking more from memory than fear. "You sure?" Cole asked. "You have no idea," she whispered. They boarded the windows with broken chairs and kitchen shelves, then spread buckets of water around the cabin's edge while the wind whispered secrets through the trees. Night fell hard, bringing with it flickers of flame far off in the dark, torches bobbing like hateful stars. Micah stirred but didn't wake, and Eliza left him wrapped in blankets behind the stone hearth, praying he'd stay small and unseen. "They'll want blood," she murmured, as Cole took position at the window, rifle steady. "Then they came to the wrong cabin," he said. The first shot cracked through the night like lightning. A man screamed. Another answered with fire. Flames caught fast on the dry underbrush, and smoke poured toward the cabin like a curse. Eliza stayed near the back, eyes sharp, heart pounding like hoofbeats. When one figure rushed the front, she raised the pistol and squeezed the blast, deafening in the tight space. He fell, groaning, and Cole didn't look back, just chambered another round. More followed. Shadows at the walls, voices barking orders, boots thudding like war drums. But the cabin held. The fire roared outside, lighting up the smoke like hell's breath. And in that glow, Eliza saw one face through the window eyes, cold, smile cruel, and she knew him. Rutledge's man. The same who'd dragged Cole from the border town and left him for dead. She fired again. Missed. But the message landed. You won't find him dying this time. They retreated as dawn crept in, not defeated, just delayed. Cole sagged to the floor, sweat slicking his brow. You all right? She asked, kneeling beside him. Been worse, he rasped. They'll be back. Eliza brushed his hair from his forehead, hand trembling. So will we. When the sun finally rose, it painted the clearing in ash and gold. Smoke still curled from the tree line, but the cabin stood battered, scorched, alive. Cole limped outside with her help, gazing at the blackened trail left by the retreating flames. That badge won't stop them, Eliza said. No, he answered. But this, he nodded toward her, toward Micah still sleeping unbroken. This might. They didn't speak again for a long time, just stood there as the smoke thinned and the crows circled overhead, as if even death had paused to catch its breath. And in that hush, Eliza realized something she hadn't dared believe before. This wasn't the end of their running, but it might just be the start of their stand. The morning after the fire was a silence thicker than grief, broken only by the hiss of dying embers and the faint creak of scorched wood shifting in the breeze. Eliza stepped barefoot into the yard, ash clinging to the hem of her dress, and her eyes scanned the edge of the trees where the enemy had vanished like ghosts. Micah still slept, his small hand curled around a button from Cole's coat, and Cole himself sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, as still as a statue carved by war. His face was drawn but calm, and when he looked at her, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there the day before, something quiet and terrifyingly steady. We bought ourselves a night, he said, voice hoarse. Nothing more. She nodded, picking up the scattered tin cups from the dirt, her fingers aching from the fight. Then let's make tomorrow more expensive. He almost smiled at that, but the weight in the air didn't lift. They both knew it was coming. A second wave, bigger, meaner, ordered. Eliza went inside and knelt by the trunk at the base of the bed. Beneath folded linens and dried herbs lay her journal, the one she hadn't touched since leaving Kansas. She flipped it open and tore out the last page, dipping the quill in what little ink remained. She wrote without hesitation, signing only her first name. When she folded it and sealed it in the torn corner of a flour sack, Cole stepped in. What's that? If they kill us, she said without looking up. Someone has to know why. He took it without a word, tucking it into the lining of his coat. That afternoon they buried the man she shot, digging a grave beneath the leaning pine. They didn't speak as they covered him in dirt, just worked side by side like two halves of something unfinished. He had a name, Cole said when they were done. They all do. Don't let that be what undoes you. She looked at him then, not like he was broken, but like she finally saw the man behind the ruin. And what name did you wear before all this? He hesitated. Matthew Cole Hart, U.S. Marshal, sworn and buried. And now, she asked. He turned his face to the wind. Just Cole, just trying. Night came heavy and without stars. Micah sat between them on the floor, cradling a bowl of beans like it was treasure. And when he leaned against Cole's side, the man didn't flinch. Eliza watched them, something unraveling and reweaving in her chest. She knew then what tomorrow meant. Not a battle, a reckoning. When the knock came just past midnight, it wasn't boots or torches or bullets. It was soft. 2 taps, pause, then one more. Cole was at the door with the rifle in hand before the last knock fell, but Eliza stepped ahead of him. Let me. She opened it slowly, heart thudding, and standing there in the dark was a woman. Cloaked in deerskin, hair streaked with gray, eyes like obsidian. She carried no weapon, just a pouch tied at her waist and a scar down the center of her chin. You are Eliza? The woman asked. Her voice was wind and river and something older. Eliza nodded. I am Taki, she said. My brother is the one you nursed in the canyon last spring. The one with the broken leg. Eliza's breath caught. She remembered vaguely, through fever and hunger. A man half dead, crawling through thorns. She hadn't known if he'd lived. He did not forget, Taki said, as if reading her mind. Word reached us of torches, of a cabin that did not burn. He sent me to warn you. Warn us? Cole stepped forward. Of what? Rutledge rides tomorrow, with 20 men, paid, not sworn. They mean to erase what they call defiance. Eliza swallowed hard. Why help us? Taki looked between them. Because kindness that expects nothing is power they will never understand. And because my brother walks today because of your hands. She handed Eliza a pouch. Dried root. Boil it in water. Drink it before dawn. It will help steady your blood. Then she turned to go, disappearing into the dark like smoke curling into the trees. Eliza stood frozen for a beat before clutching the pouch to her chest, then turned to Cole. Do we leave? He shook his head. We dig in. And so they did. They built trenches in the earth and traps in the brush. Eliza packed food for 3 days and wrapped Micah's arms in strips of leather, not for battle but for safety. At sunrise, they stood together at the door, marshal and bride, outlaw and mother, sinner and healer, neither one wholly innocent or damned. You ready? He asked. No, she whispered, but I'm here, and sometimes that was more than enough. They came with the wind, dust rising behind their horses like a funeral shroud unrolled across the plains, and Eliza counted 17 shadows from the edge of the loft, her rifle resting steady on the windowsill, even as her heartbeat thudded like a war drum beneath her ribs. Micah was hidden beneath the floorboards, wrapped in Cole's old coat and a whisper of prayer, while Cole himself knelt behind the barn wall, his silhouette tight and focused, more wolf than man now. The morning sun spilled red across Deadman's Hollow, and for a moment it felt like the land itself was holding its breath. You see, Rutledge? Cole's voice was a low murmur through the gap in the wood. Eliza nodded once. Middle horse, pale duster. He's wearing the preacher's hat. Cole didn't swear, didn't flinch, just cocked the rifle and steadied his breath. Then we end this. The riders slowed near the gate, their formation shifting like wolves circling a wounded animal, and Rutledge raised one gloved hand. You've had your warning, he called. You, harbor, a fugitive, a killer. And you, girl, you were bought with salvation, not this outlaw's ruin. Eliza stepped into the light then, hair braided tight, apron tied over her skirt, and the rifle in her arms like a staff carved by fire. Funny thing about salvation, she said, voice clear. It don't come from men who light matches and hide behind crosses. The men laughed, but it was brittle, uncertain. And Cole used that moment to fire. The bullet cracked through the morning with the weight of a verdict, and the man beside Rutledge fell backward off his horse, the scream of hooves rising in sudden panic. Chaos broke like a dam. Gunfire roared, and the cabin walls splintered under the rain of bullets. But Eliza didn't duck. She fired again and again, her hands shaking but sure. And each shot was a memory, a confession, a wound she'd refused to let fester. Cole moved like a shadow in the trees, drawing fire away, his path weaving through traps they'd laid the night before. One rider's scream rose high as he fell into the pit lined with sharpened stakes. Another cursed as the tripwire snapped his leg sideways with a sickening crack. Still, they pressed forward. Still, Rutledge remained, barking orders and firing wildly, each shot punctuated by the madness of a man whose world refused to kneel. When the smoke thickened and the screams quieted, Eliza stepped into the yard, her dress torn, soot on her cheek, and the rifle empty but still clutched in white-knuckled hands. Only 5 men remained, one crawling, one weeping, the others circling wide, suddenly less sure of who the hunted really was. Rutledge stood in the center, alone now, blood on his cheek where a bullet had grazed him. You think this ends with me? He sneered. You think your little frontier justice holds a candle to the fire coming behind me? Eliza didn't answer. Cole stepped from the barn, dragging one of the wounded by the collar, and tossed him at Rutledge's feet. Your men don't bleed like legends, he said. They scream like boys. Rutledge lifted his pistol, aimed at Eliza, and fired. But nothing came. The chamber clicked, empty. Cole didn't give him a second try. One shot from his revolver caught Rutledge in the thigh, dropping him to his knees, and another knocked the pistol from his hand. "Don't kill him," Eliza said softly, walking to them both. "Not yet." She knelt in the dust, looking Rutledge in the eye. "You came here for obedience, for silence, but you found a woman who ain't kneeling anymore, and a man who stopped running." He spat blood at her boots. "You'll die for this." "Maybe," she said, standing, "but I won't die afraid." They tied the survivors to the broken fence posts and burned Rutledge's duster as the first warning. By nightfall, the prairie was quiet again, but it wasn't peace, it was something older, harder, earned by fire and grit and grief. Eliza sat beside Micah's hiding place, lifting the floorboard gently. He blinked up at her, cheeks streaked with dirt, and threw his arms around her neck. "Is it over?" he whispered. She held him tight. "For now, little star." Outside, Cole stood watch, but not like before. He wasn't waiting for death anymore. He was guarding life. And when Eliza stepped out and stood beside him, their shadows stretched together toward the distant hills, the preacher's promise behind them, and something unwritten rising ahead. She didn't know what came next, whether more riders would follow, whether the law would call her traitor or heroine, but for the first time in her life, she didn't flinch from not knowing. Because sometimes salvation didn't come from pulpits or promises. Sometimes it came from picking up a rifle, standing your ground, and daring the world to see who you'd become. The morning came wrapped in fog and quiet, the kind of hush that settles after a battle when the land doesn't yet know who won. Eliza stood barefoot on the porch, a tin cup cooling in her hand, and her hair unbraided for the first time in weeks. Micah still slept soundly in the crook of the bed, tucked against the quilt she'd patched 100 times, and Cole sat on the cabin stoop sharpening his knife, not for war now, but for work cutting rope, shaping wood, maybe finally mending the broken corral fence. The hollow didn't carry gunpowder anymore. It carried breath, the kind that shivers on its way out. She watched him for a long moment, remembering the way he'd thrown himself between her and death, how his voice had cracked when he'd thought they wouldn't make it. And then her eyes drifted to the saddlebags, draped over the post, still covered in soot from the fire, still holding the ashes of another life. With a deep breath, she walked to them, opening the flap she hadn't dared touch in days, and pulled out the folded parchment tied in waxed string. Cole looked up when he heard the rustle. "That yours?" She nodded. "The one I wrote before the fight, in case we didn't." She didn't finish the sentence. He stood and walked to her, hands rough but gentle as he took the letter, weighing it like it might carry more than ink. "You want me to read it?" She hesitated, then nodded. He opened it slowly, carefully, and began to read. She watched his face, every flicker of his brow, every tightening of his jaw. He read it twice before looking up. "You wrote like you'd already buried yourself." "I did," she said. "I just didn't know the ground was too stubborn to take me." He folded the letter and handed it back. "You're not that woman anymore." She stared at the page, the words blurred now with morning dew. "Then who am I?" "You're the one who walked through fire and didn't burn. The one who looked Rutledge in the eye and said no." She swallowed hard. "And you?" He chuckled softly. "I'm just a man who finally figured out what's worth staying for." That afternoon they rode out together, leaving Micah with old Martha Tillman down by the river, whose stubborn hens and louder opinions made her the safest place in 10 counties. Eliza wore her shotgun strapped across her back, and Cole wore his star, not because it still held power, but because it reminded him who he'd once wanted to be. They rode in silence for miles, past the ridge where the first shots had been fired, past the graves they'd dug and marked with wildflowers and stone. And then they reached the town, the same one where Eliza had been paraded in chains, where she'd been auctioned like cattle and called wife by a man who'd bought her with lies. The townsfolk stared as they passed, whispers rippling behind them like a second wind, and Eliza held her head high. At the saloon, Cole dismounted and helped her down. "You sure?" he asked. "I have to do this," she said. "I'm not coming here as property. I'm coming as a woman who knows what she survived." Inside, the piano stopped mid-note. The bartender dropped a bottle. And behind the bar, the sheriff turned pale. "Miss Eliza," he said, like a man greeting a ghost. You didn't expect me to live, she finished for him. But I did, and I'm not here for revenge, I'm here to speak. She stepped onto the platform where once they'd forced her to stand and turned to face them all. You all watched it happen. Watched them buy me, watched them break me, and none of you said a word. But I'm not here to punish, I'm here to warn. What happened to me won't happen again, because I'm not alone now. And because the next woman you see chained up might just set fire to the whole damn town. A silence followed so deep it rang. And then, from the back, an old man with a cane stood and removed his hat. She's right, he said. We failed her. And others too. One by one, heads bowed. Not out of guilt, but out of recognition. Out of the slow, painful awakening that maybe silence was the cruelest act of all. When Eliza stepped down, Cole reached for her hand. She didn't take it not yet. She walked past him and out into the sun, letting the light touch her like a baptism. Only when they reached the horses again did she turn to him. You coming? He smiled. Where to? Back to the hollow, she said. There's work to do. And so they rode, not to escape but to begin. Behind them the town stirred, changed not by blood or fire, but by the courage of a voice once silenced, now roaring like thunder across the land. The stranger came just after sunset, when the fire was lit low, and Eliza sat beside it with a bowl of stew and the sound of Micah's laughter drifting faintly from the barn where he played with a litter of kittens they'd found behind the tool shed. Cole was out back mending the fence line, shirt damp with sweat and sawdust, and the hollow had the kind of peace that made you forget what you'd survived to earn it. She heard the horse before she saw him, a slow, deliberate trot, one rider, not in a hurry but not careless either. She stood, rifle in hand without thinking, eyes scanning the trees beyond the gate, and then he emerged from the dusk, like a memory stepping out of fog. He was tall and cloaked in a gray coat that hung heavy with dust, a wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes, and something about the way he rode made her skin prickle, not fear, exactly, but recognition. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't raise his hands either, just stopped 10 feet from the fence and dismounted slowly. Eliza didn't lower the rifle. You lost? She called. The man looked up then, and in the dying light she caught the lines on his face, the roughness of a beard not trimmed in weeks, and eyes the color of wet stone. No, ma'am, he said softly. I came to ask a question. Cole stepped out then, wiping his hands on a rag and narrowing his eyes as he walked up beside her. You know him? He murmured. No, she replied, still watching the man. But he knows me. The stranger nodded once. I heard what happened in town, what she said, what she did. Heard there was a woman out here who changed the story. He paused, voice dry. I wanted to know her name. Eliza blinked. Why? Because there's a girl, he said, 4 towns over, sold to a rancher who beats her. I tried to speak. They laughed, told me women like that didn't matter. His jaw clenched. But then I heard someone rode into town and stood where they hung the chains, and she made the silence crack. Eliza's heart beat faster, not from danger, but from the weight of what he carried in his voice. You want me to go there? No, he said. I want to bring her here. Cole stepped forward then, not aggressive, but firm. We don't run a rescue line, he said. This isn't a mission. The man nodded. Understood. But you do run a place where truth lives, where boys like Micah laugh again, where the dirt carries something sacred. He looked at Eliza. They say your name like it's a ghost, but I don't believe ghosts bleed to protect others. I think they rise. Silence fell again, long and heavy. And then Eliza walked forward past the gate until she stood in front of him. My name, she said slowly, is Eliza Blackwood. I was sold once, branded by silence, burned by men who thought my voice was too small. But I ain't small anymore, and if that girl rides here, she'll ride into something different. She looked past him, into the dark beyond the trail. You tell her this place isn't heaven. It's work. It's dirt and fence posts and nights where the past howls through the trees. But it's also a place where nobody bows. Not to fear. Not to shame. Not to men like the one who hurt her. His eyes filled, not with tears, but with the kind of grief that had learned to be still. "Thank you," he whispered. He turned to mount his horse again, but Eliza held up a hand. "Wait." She walked to the porch and pulled a folded quilt from the bench of patchwork of Micah's old clothes, stitched by her hands when sleep wouldn't come. She handed it to him. "Give her this. Tell her it's from a woman who knows cold can be beaten if someone wraps you in something real." He took it with both hands like it was made of gold. Then he rode off, disappearing into the night as quietly as he'd come. Cole stepped up beside her, exhaling long. "You sure?" "No," she said. "But what good is surviving if we don't make it mean something?" That night, she sat by the fire long after the flames went to embers, staring into the shadows with eyes wide open, listening not for threats but for footsteps, because sometimes you send out hope like a flare. And sometimes, if the wind is right, it comes back in the form of a name spoken by someone who believes. Her name was Eliza Blackwood, and somewhere out there, someone else had just learned it mattered. The girl arrived just before dawn, the horizon still dressed in bruised violet and pale gold, the air trembling with that quiet chill that clings before the world fully wakes. Eliza had been sitting on the porch since midnight, boots flat on the wood, shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Micah curled against her side beneath a blanket, his breath slow and steady as a heartbeat. Cole had offered to keep watch, but she'd shaken her head. This one was hers. She heard the hooves long before she saw the shape soft, tired, not the gallop of fear, but the dragging rhythm of someone who had made it because they had to, not because they could. The horse was lean and worn, its coat dulled by dust and long miles. The girl on its back looked like a shadow wrapped in burlap, her hair hanging in tangled strands over one shoulder, her hands gripping the reins like they were the last rope keeping her from falling through the sky. She didn't speak when she stopped at the gate, just looked at Eliza with eyes that had seen too much and lips pressed tight like every word had been beaten out of her. Eliza stood slowly, careful not to jostle Micah. She met the girl's gaze and held it. No question, no pity, just presence. "My name's Eliza," she said softly. "This is a place where you can sit down and not flinch." The girl's throat worked like she was trying to remember how to swallow. "He told me about the quilt," she said hoarsely. Eliza nodded. "You'll find more here. They don't all fit perfect. Some patches are ugly. Some tear easy, but they're warm." She walked forward and reached for the reins, letting the girl decide if she'd hand them over. After a heartbeat, the girl let go. Eliza took the horse to the trough, whispering to it like an old friend, and Cole came out with a bowl of oats and a bucket of water without needing to be asked. When Eliza returned, the girl was still sitting tall in the saddle like getting down might undo her. So Eliza climbed up on the porch and sat again, leaving space beside her. "No one's going to ask you to talk," she said gently. "But if you want to just breathe, this is a good place for it." A long silence. Then the girl dismounted, legs shaking. She walked stiffly to the porch, boots too big and dress too small, and she lowered herself down like it hurt to bend. Her hands stayed in her lap, fingers clutched so tightly they went white at the knuckles. Micah stirred, then blinked up sleepily and saw her. "You came," he said like it was a promise kept. The girl looked startled, then nodded. "Yeah, I came." He scooted closer, offered her half the blanket. She took it without a word. Eliza watched them, the fire beginning to crackle behind the screen as the sun stretched fingers of light over the horizon. "We've got stew left from last night," she offered, "and coffee that'll make your soul flinch, but it wakes you up." The girl gave a shaky laugh. "I could use both." Cole came out with a cup already in his hand, and for the first time, the girl looked up at him with something other than fear. Maybe it was the way he didn't stare, didn't lean too close. Just handed her the cup and said, "It's hot," then walked off to start feeding the chickens like the world hadn't just changed again. They sat there until the sun rose high enough to warm the wood, until the girl leaned her head on Micah's shoulder and let her eyelids fall. Eliza didn't move, didn't speak, just sat and held the space like a prayer. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come in lightning or thunder. Sometimes it arrives on a tired horse with a broken girl and a blanket to share. And when it does, you don't ask for her story. You just give her a seat. And hope, maybe, it's enough to begin again. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story touched you, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let us feel a little closer across the miles. Every story finds its home in the hearts of those who need it, and sometimes that's all it takes. If you'd like to hear more stories that lift the spirit and remind us of the quiet miracles around us, feel free to subscribe. We're building something meaningful here, and it means so much to have you along the way. From our hearts to yours, thank you for spending this time with us.